Tonight we have an extraordinary program because Mr. Extraordinaire is here, Troy Bradley. If he doesn't have the record, there is no such thing as a record. Troy has every record you possibly can think of. He has done more than half of us even have thought of doing. And I'll tell you, I like to list him as one of my friends without going on Facebook to tell everybody how you guys LOL one another or what the hell ever you do with one another. But I'll tell you something. Troy has helped Quad A out immensely a dozen, maybe 24 times by coming on, putting on a program for us at the moment's notice, and he always has something that's unbelievably interested. He's going to talk about what I would consider probably one of the craziest things he's done, which always really excites me, flying over the Grand Canyon, or maybe doing whatever they try to do over the Grand Canyon. We'll find out shortly. Troy?
I've got to switch out the cable here. Or how do you switch out? I'll let you touch that. Switch over. That way I'm not getting germs all over everything. Make sure we get it up there. All right, that works. All right, thanks, Frank, for the introduction. I appreciate it. Frank is actually the one. Okay, Frank is actually the one that put me on the spot a couple months ago. This was maybe 3 or 4 months ago. Frank said, "Hey, come and speak to the Quad A. We'd love to hear you." I said, "Hear what?" And he goes, "I don't know. You've done a lot of things. Just speak about something." Do you know how much pressure there is in just an open-ended type thing like that? I'm like, I don't know what to talk about. I've done a lot of different things, but I also wanted to make sure that it was something that was relevant and more close to this time. And so about a month ago, I called him on my way back from Arizona, and I said, "I got one for you. We'll talk about the Grand Canyon." That's something that is something that anybody can actually do, and it's kind of surprising that more people don't do it. But it's also a daunting task. So. Anyway, it's been around for a long time. Obviously, it's a beautiful spot on this earth. It's one of the nature's definite beautiful places that everybody in the world seems to know. Everybody knows about the Grand Canyon and all the adventures that you can have in some place like that. So I named it the Grand Canyon Grand Adventure. So this actually started. I was sitting in my office at my house on a Tuesday afternoon at about 1:45 when my wife gives me a text that says, "Grand Canyon tomorrow, huh?" And I was like, and I gave her a question mark back. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Unlike Frank, we spend some time on Facebook apparently. So anybody that was on Facebook probably saw this post from John Radowski that says, "Ultra last minute Grand Canyon flight alert." Well, I've talked to John for years about the Grand Canyon. John's actually flown it 3 times. He's also done a kind of a traverse of the southern part of it, going east or west to east. So he's done more flying around the Grand Canyon than anybody ever with a balloon. So when John said, it looks like a go, I felt that it was a pretty good chance that it was a go. And I started thinking timing. And I looked at it, and it's in Kanab, where we were going to take off, Kanab, Utah, which is right on the Arizona-Utah border. We were looking at having about 19 hours before sunrise. And speaking of, he just came in back there, Mr. Radowski. So if you have any questions about the Grand Canyon, this guy, he's the one that studied it more than anybody, and I felt very confident when I saw John's post that things look good. But 19 hours, I'm thinking drive time, finding crew, doing all the things that are necessary. I used one trailer kind of for a storage, so I don't really use it a lot. It needed 2 new tires to be roadworthy, really. So I was down at Discount Tire getting tires, my crew's getting ready to leave. And we were actually on the road by about 5:30 or 6 that evening. We pulled in somewhere around 1:30 in the morning. But before I did that, I was talking to John. I'm asking him about distances that we have to travel, what the weather's looking like. And I did do a quick weather scrub myself. So this was actually the prog chart for the next day. You can see a high pressure system over the area. The isobars, there's not a lot, which means there's going to be fairly light surface winds in the area. And the wind's aloft. By looking at this, and it's very hard to see, I know, from this point, but basically you can see how it's going to a north-south route, and that's all the way across the state of Arizona. And that's at 9,000, 12,000, and 15,000. And that's kind of the flight parameters that we were looking at. Just to give you a better idea, a little bit closer up there, you can see how it's a very exact flow, and it's doing the same thing through all those altitudes. And even when I do the Sandias or something, that's the same thing I'm looking for. I don't want something that's kind of wishy-washy on the models, that you know, it's not going to be there, that you're on just the edge of something. It's much better to be in the center of this, and it looked like we were going to be right in the center of it. And like I said, John studied this so much that I knew that we had a pretty good chance of finding the right weather for this, so it was worth putting everything together in a very short time period. So also just looking at the LAMP forecast, I pulled up Flagstaff. You can see the mornings it was going to be almost dead calm. That's kind of the landing area that we were looking going towards. And then the Grand Canyon Airport itself, you can see the very light winds. So in between the Grand Canyon at the airport and Flagstaff, that was kind of the target area, and it looked like there was good conditions on the surface as well. So it only took me about 10 minutes, based on John's looking at it already, to say, yeah, let's put this together and let's go do it. So just a little history. There's been several people that have flown across the Grand Canyon. Like I said, John's actually done it more than anyone. He's flown across 3 times now. But it started way back in 1966, and it was Tracy Barnes. And Tracy was doing the first cross-country balloon flight, trying to go coast to coast from California all the way to the East Coast. And he spent months and months doing this. He crashed into a mountain in California. He hit power lines at one point. He bailed out of the balloon. He was a skydiver before he was a balloonist. He actually bailed out when the deflation mechanism failed on his balloon at one point. Yeah, so he had a really rough time on this cross-country trip, but was in the Rocky Mountains for 3 days at one point. The crew couldn't find him. I mean, we're talking 1966. There's no satellite coverage or anything then. But he was the first to actually get into the Grand Canyon area with not much luck. So just like all of his other flights on this transcontinental flight, he ended this one in a tree that he had to be recovered. So the park rangers weren't real fond of balloons at that point, and having him come down and hit into one of their trees. Although there's a lot of space out there, it's you don't know where you're going to end up. So he was the first, but there's been a number of others since. Bob Walagunda was probably the second. John's been composing a list, and he sent that to me as far as who's done it. Walagunda was probably in '68. Sid actually flew out of the bottom of the canyon for Day of the Balloons in the '70s. But even to date, there's only about 36 people that have ever been across the Grand Canyon in a balloon. And less flights than that, because several of them have had multiple people on board. But the scenery is absolutely spectacular. It's changed over the years as to what you can do and how you can do it. Some of the pilots had actually gone down and done splash and dashes in the Colorado River. That's a long way down to go to get a splash and dash, and you can't do that now. Yeah, you'll be in a lot of trouble if you go down there now. So, but besides balloon flying, I mean, that's obviously a way to experience the canyon is from the air. It's such a massive area. It's, you know, over 200 miles long. It's 18 miles wide at its widest point. To try to get the scope of that, to just go stand at the southern rim at the visitor center and look out is a beautiful sight. But to imagine that just goes on and on. Airplanes, helicopters, that's what people have been looking at to see the Grand Canyon for years. So to do it in an open air basket is absolutely phenomenal to see that view from there. But the Grand Canyon has actually played a large role in our aviation history and the rules that we fly by. This accident was in 1956, and at the time it was the largest aviation accident for loss of life in the history of aviation. There was 128 people on board 2 aircraft. They both launched out of, they took off out of Los Angeles. One was headed for Kansas City, one was headed for Chicago. And over the Grand Canyon, because that was something that people wanted to go see. You want to show your passengers the Grand Canyon. The pilot's always telling you about sights to see. So they're trying to get towards the Grand Canyon. At this time, this was totally uncontrolled airspace. This was not something that they had to worry about, that they could actually change their altitude and go. And they both ended up at about 21,000 feet and ended up coming into one another and killing everyone on board. This actually led to, in 1958, the formation of the FAA. And so this was the first of 3 accidents that were mid-air collisions that caused an uproar, and people wanted to see things change. So it was over the Grand Canyon. They also had weather, so they were probably fighting visibility. And the 2 airliners collided and killed all those people. There's actually a historic marker at the Grand Canyon based on this, and it's the only historic marker for an aviation accident that we have anywhere. Then another one, almost exactly 30 years later. Both of them were in June, and this one was an accident that's the actual plane that was involved in the accident. The helicopter was just like this one. And it was a sightseeing tour, and they collided. They were probably flying below the rim of the canyon, which at that time was not an illegal thing to do either. You could do it. But with so many tour operators, you got people coming out of Phoenix, Los Angeles, Vegas, plus the ones that are operating right at the canyon. It can be actually a busier airspace than you think, and if you're coming around a rock and you can't see somebody else, that's definitely going to be a problem. And this accident killed 25 people when the 2 aircraft collided. So with that, there was a sense with the FAA that in the NTSB that obviously things needed to be kind of put into control and things needed to be changed. And they came up with basically a whole different airspace for the Grand Canyon and how you could fly through it. You can still fly it, and that's what a lot of pilots don't understand, is that it's still a flyable place. Airplanes, it's obviously much easier because there are corridors, and as long as you maintain within that corridor, any general aviation pilot can go fly through those corridors. It separates you from the tour traffic as well, and there's altitudes that you have to be at. So it's a very precise flight that you have to make to go do it. What you can see on that chart, and there is a special chart, VFR chart, just for the Grand Canyon. The purple areas are actually no-fly zones. You have to stay out of those completely because of noise ordinances and things like that. They're trying to also preserve the canyon for the people that are down in it. So they want to make sure that it has that natural beauty as well, and not seeing airplanes just flying constantly by. But in between those purple areas, those are flight corridors. So you can actually go and fly through those corridors at given altitudes, and you're able to do it safely, legally, and without any permission from anybody else. As a matter of fact, you just have to monitor the frequencies in order to stay there and make sure that nobody is near you. So it's really it's up to the pilots to make that safe. Well, obviously with a balloon, we don't fly a corridor. Especially for the kind of distances that we're looking at. And so to fly a corridor and go through that would be very tricky, and also to be going the right direction at that point because there's different altitudes for north and south, depending on which way you're traversing the canyon. So there's no way that we could possibly do it. Well, these purple areas, they top out at 14,500 feet. So at that point, you're now back into uncontrolled airspace. So we're able to actually fly above the entire canyon as long as you can maintain 14.5 or higher. Up to 18, obviously you can't get into positive control airspace. But as long as you can maintain that, you can go fly across the Grand Canyon. And that's what John, by studying the FARs and really looking at it, said this is a doable flight. And it's a very doable flight because the altitudes that you have to go to, 14.5 to 18,000, that's where the right winds are going to be. That's where the speeds are going to be that you need to actually get across, because you have a long, long way to go. So when we left town, we were headed over and driving that way. And this is actually the Navajo Generation power plant. It's a coal-powered plant right outside of Page, Arizona. And so we're coming down the hill, and this is the shot that I had. It wasn't a very good one, but I was excited. It's like midnight, and that smoke's going straight up. I'm like, this is awesome. We're going to have a great day tomorrow. So you want to have those light surface winds and the fast winds aloft, and everything seemed to be setting up, and this indicated that it definitely was looking like that. So the next morning when we got up, doing just like what any of you would do, just checking blast valve. It's all the same information, just depends on where you're looking at it. And you can see for the Grand Canyon, Flagstaff, Page, everything's calm all the way across for launch, and the forecast is variable all the way across the time period, and the winds aloft are strong, and they're strong in the right direction, and it's all across the state. So everything matched up. This was actually a perfect scenario for trying to do the Grand Canyon. You couldn't ask for a better setup. So we all met for breakfast at the hotel, and then we headed out to Kanab Airport. I didn't even know where Kanab was before I started on this drive, truthfully. I didn't know it was in Utah even. But we headed out to the airport. Unfortunately, where John had used prior for taking off from the airport, they liked the balloons. They wanted to have aviation out there. That part was blocked off. We had some obstacles that we couldn't actually fly from that area. But he talked to the airport manager and actually got us onto the airport property. So we were inside the property, laying out on one of the taxiways there. And absolutely beautiful morning. We had 5 balloons out there, the most that have ever flown across the Grand Canyon at one time, which is pretty remarkable. And I love, whether it's the Grand Canyon or the Sandias or whatever, it's always a lot more fun if you have other people doing it, because then you can get the pictures of the other pilots and you see what you look like and all that. So it was absolutely awesome. So just kind of going down the row from by the A3, that was Shane Corey that was flying. The next balloon in the line, the black one, is John, and then I'm next with my 105, Sean Wicks, and then Dean Donnelly. So we had 5 balloons all set to launch, and we launched in very close proximity to one another in time-wise. As a matter of fact, I kind of kissed Sean Wicks on the way out of there. You can see how we were very close. So even though we're trying to keep a tight formation to go across, we got some spread just based on how fast everyone was climbing out of there. But it was almost dead calm, just up to several thousand feet. So you can see 4 of the shadows there. There's my balloon. So this is actually looking away from the canyon. You can see how rough it is even to the north of us. That's looking northward, and one of the pilots actually came on the radio and he goes, "Which way are we supposed to go?" We all arrived at night. We all came at night. We don't know where the hell we're looking at, and John's like, "We're actually going the other way," So, but the airport's right there. You can see that at the bottom of the picture. So we weren't moving very fast, but then we started going. That's looking towards the canyon now. That's actually a shot from John's balloon, looking back at the other 4 balloons. So oxygen is obviously a necessity for something like this. That's one of the things that probably precludes some people from jumping on when you see a posting on Facebook. It's like, well, one of the requirements is you got to have oxygen. And not everybody has oxygen just sitting around. And it's not as easy to get that filled anymore these days, requiring a prescription if you're going to do medical oxygen. So that's one of those things that you have to have ready to go. And fortunately, I had tanks, and all the other pilots had some available to them. So this is, as we're heading towards the canyon, the closest balloon there is, well, actually, so this is from John's balloon. The big balloon there that you can see is Sean, and then the other 3 are down there, and they're just kind of dots. So you can see even the spread getting, from that point, we're already spreading out a little bit. And that's from my balloon. That's looking at John and Sean going, and you can see Mount Humphreys out there that we're kind of heading towards that direction. We had about a 165 track, which was perfect for getting to good landing areas. So this is still approaching. We're at over the Kaibab forest, which is huge. There's not a whole lot of bailout options that aren't going to require a helicopter rescue. So you think of the Grand Canyon as the obstacle, but it's a lot more than that. It's the entire forested area on either side of it and the Grand Canyon itself. The Grand Canyon's about 1.2 million acres. The forest is about 1.6, and that extends on both sides of the canyon. So there's a lot of areas that you're not going to get out of with any kind of ease, and probably be in a lot of trouble if you put it down in there. So this is the Kaibab Plateau that we're heading towards. Absolutely beautiful. So I mean, the scenery was incredible even before getting to the Grand Canyon, just the approach to this. There are some roads that are kind of service roads for the Forest Service and things like that, but still not anywhere that you'd want to put down if you could avoid it. It's another shot looking up in the balloon. So now we're starting to approach. You can see the canyon coming, and you can see how the forest just kind of drops off from that point. Absolutely spectacular. I mean, you couldn't look in any direction and not have a great shot. It was beautiful. So you can see the massive bits of it. This is looking off to the west, so that's the way that that photo's taken there. So we're actually crossing the canyon this direction, kind of headed this way. I put that picture in just because I took a shot while I was in the air. You can see my pressure on my gauge there. I was at about 80 psi. A mistake that a lot of people make on doing anything, whether it's the mountain or even just trying to extend a flight in your regular balloon, I see it with a lot of pilots. They'll want to pressurize the heck out of it. They'll do nitrogen. They'll heat their tanks. These burners are so much more powerful than they were 30 or 40 years ago that you don't need that high pressure in order to make a balloon fly. And the higher the pressure, the more fuel you're pumping through, the more you're going to go through. And so you want to have a reasonable amount of pressure, not something that's twice that, and there's no reason to have that. Everyone thinks more pressure is better in certain situations, not most. So here we are approaching the canyon still. I'm at 14.8 there. Like I said, you had to be above 14.5 in order to clear all the airspace and be legal for this. And it's so massive that you can just see down the side of the basket there, and it looks like the ground's right next to me because it's just it's so incredibly big. Everything, everywhere you look. But like I said, you couldn't take a bad picture. It was just there was nothing but beautiful scenery the entire way across, and being able to enjoy it with friends and other balloons was really, really cool. So here's from my balloon. That's looking back. I was in the middle of the pack. John and Sean were in the front of me. Shane and Dean were behind me. So the highest balloon back there is Dean. The lower one over there is Shane Corey. And this is just reaching the northern edge of the canyon there. And down in there, you can start to see the Colorado River. And just tons of beautiful vistas and totally places that you're never going to get into. Like I said, you don't want to go down at this point. There's the Colorado River there. You can see that down through the edge of the picture there. This is the massiveness of this canyon. You can see Shane Corey. I'm higher than he is, but you can't even tell how high he is because it's so big. And he was very high, and it's just the way that the angles and the pictures, you just can't even imagine. Just pulled it in a little bit so you could actually see him. Now you can barely see him in there. So the canyon really isn't the biggest part of the flight as far as the distance that we needed to travel, but this is approaching the southern edge of the canyon, and you can kind of see that one little outcropping that's cleared there. And if you visited the Grand Canyon, that's probably where you went, to the southern rim, and that's where the visitor center is, and that's where a lot of the activities happen, bus tours and all that kind of stuff. So more than likely, if you visited, that's probably where you were, and it was pretty cool to fly right over the visitor center. I'm sure the visitors got excited about it. And this picture has Dean. He's a little bit lower than I am there as well, as we're approaching the other side of the canyon. And I'm up at that point with that picture. I'm at 15.2 still. So that's we've crossed it. We're over on the other side, still moving pretty quickly. Our speeds at that point were 40 to 45 miles an hour, kind of on average. So we had plenty of speed to get across, which is good. This is the airport actually out there, but you can see even by the airport that's not anywhere to land. It's all pretty rugged country. And just looking back at the canyon. So we all got out there to the south of the airport and south of the canyon by quite a few miles. Everyone else was a little bit more west of me. I came over trying to get as close to the highway as I could. But this is the kind of landing area that you're looking at. So it looks pretty. It's kind of like the mesa, but a lot of scrub out there, and not a real easy area. And so you can see this is where I ended up coming down. Lindsay and John and several people helped us with recovery out of here. It was a little bit of a walk out of this field. But all those bumps that you see, those are actually logs that have been cut down and stuff. So it's yeah, it was a little rough. But we were right off of Highway 180, Williams and Flagstaff, right in between. And the road that I landed by, this dirt road, actually does run all the way through. You can take it all the way to Flagstaff, but I don't know if it would have been passable all the way through while we were there. So this is kind of the way that we tracked. Like I said, when you look at the map, it seems daunting, and that you can't really fly there, that you have to stay in these corridors and stuff, but that's not true. As long as you have the altitude, you can fly through the entire area, wherever. And so this was kind of our track that went through there. We just passed just barely to the east of the airport, or I did at least. Let's see, a little bit bigger map here, because that map doesn't go too far. So where it starts up here, that's actually the state line for Utah and Arizona. That's where Kanab is, and there's our track across. So my flight in total was about 103 miles, and 103 miles, 3 hours and 7 minutes, and I used 33 gallons of fuel. So that's another thing that I think a lot of people think is a limiting factor, is the amount of fuel. There again, if you fly a lightly loaded balloon, you'll use less fuel. A lot of times you're just carrying fuel to burn fuel, and so you don't need to have that much. I know last month you had Bill Smith here talking about the long jump. I mean, he flew for 750 miles on 40 gallons of fuel. So you don't need to have a ton of fuel. You just have to have the right weather conditions. So since it started with Teddy Roosevelt on there, I decided to end it with also that most of us tiptoe through life in order to make it safely to death. Great quote. If you don't take the chance and go out and give it a try, you know, there's no why, you know. And what's funny is my wife, as soon as she texted me that day, and I said, well, I don't know, and she goes, why not? Why wouldn't you go do that? The weather's set up, you can get a crew, you can do it. Why not? Why wouldn't you go do that? So you need to go and, you know, have those adventures, have fun, do it safely, fly with your head and make sure that everything's in order, and it's a great flight. It's really no different than crossing the mesa, going down and ground tracking. We're just doing it at 15,000 feet for 3 hours. There you go. So that's all I have. John, do you want to add anything there? Or? Yeah. All right. It was fun. It was fun. Yeah, John's the instigator, so he should be up here talking.
I actually accidentally wound up here tonight. I had no idea this was going on, but I was on my way to Taos. But yeah, I missed the first few minutes, but pretty much this all started because I had no passenger flights, and when I'm not making money, I get really, really bored. And so I started looking at the weather, what could the next morning bring if, you know, I didn't have any passengers. Sometimes we go out and have a fun flight in Phoenix. We go do some high altitude stuff, see if we could do some cross-country flying. And I accidentally scrolled a little bit north on the map and saw the winds were going from north-northwest to south-southeast really fast at high altitude. So in the span of about an hour, plus a little bit of instigation from people who will remain nameless, she bought me a pizza and we had to go do it. So that's really how it started. But you know, planning something like this doesn't happen more than a couple days in advance. So yes, it did. Yeah, it was on my personal page, so I just kind of put it out there, and so friend me, and we'll include everybody on it. But yeah, it was a very, very last minute thing, which it always is. But it took me a couple hours to really cement in my head that the scenario looks good. The situation with the weather is pretty sustainable. None of the forecasts were really wavering very much. And at that point, I'm like, there's no good reason not to do this tomorrow. So got the oxygen, had to go refill the tanks, and that was pretty much the hardest thing about the planning is getting the oxygen refilled, kind of short notice. I went to a welding company. They still wouldn't refill our medical oxygen tanks because you need a prescription. But they called their boss. They explained to the boss what we were about to do, and the boss said, "Okay, do it." You know, like you're going to overdose on oxygen. So getting oxygen turned out to be the biggest hassle in planning it. The very first time I did the flight was with another commercial pilot I took, Jesse Roholt, and we crossed from north to south. That was a little scary, to be totally honest. It was a really an exercise in faith in the weather forecasting, because there's a lot of altitude to get to where the winds aloft are. And so for like the first 15, 20, 30 minutes of the flight, you're just cruising along, burning more and more fuel in a climb until you finally hit the winds that are forecast. So you really don't have too many bailout points once you get a fair bit south. So that first flight was really an eye-opening experience in, you know, you could do anything you set your mind to, but you know, the first time you do something is going to be kind of scary if it's a really huge leap, and that was. So the subsequent couple flights were a lot easier. Of course, it's nothing you want to ever take lightly. You can have a lot of things go wrong. So if your equipment's not in tip-top shape, it's a good idea to sit it out if you're not absolutely sure of all the factors going into it. But we had a good flight, and that was a super great time. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for coming. Troy was really actually once he said, "Hey, I'm in," that was probably within 2 or 3 hours of the first notification. I'm like, all right, this is gonna be fun. And once we had more than actually, Sean Wicks was the first to go, "I'm in," unequivocally. He's like, "You think it looks like a good morning? We're in." And then Troy was in, and then the other two. But yeah, that was a heck of a good time, and so I'm happy to have been part of it. So thanks for the presentation.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Troy. Thank you unbelievably very much.